Hi everyone, in this video I want to talk about starting to create your live performance in Ableton and specifically how to interact with Ableton in a way that's most beneficial for your live performance needs. Now, as you might know already, there are lots of different methods to communicate, so to speak, with Ableton in a live performance situation. You can use the MIDI Learn functionality, you can use a dedicated, in other words, supported MIDI controller. You can use user scripts as provided by Ableton, and you can even use an iOS or Android device, which communicates with Ableton over a wireless network. I'll have to show you this last one in another video though, but in this video I want to explore all the different methods of communicating with Ableton via MIDI. Now, since there's still a lot of ground to cover, I will move fast through these different methods. It should, however, give you a very good overview of all your options and should allow you to choose a method that works for you. And if you want a more in-depth look at each of these methods, I also have a full video course on the subject, which I'll link to in the description. So let's start with a quick overview on MIDI. MIDI stands for Musical Instruments Digital Interface, which sounds kind of cool, but in reality they are just very boring few-digit messages that are being sent from a hardware controller to an operating system. We can look at these messages via a MIDI monitor application, and there are lots of these available for free on both Mac and Windows, but the one I prefer is simply called MIDI Monitor. If I launch this application and hit a button on a controller, I get to see which messages are being sent. And what the message looks like depends on the specific controller that you're using, but for a button or encoder, it will always have a specific channel, a specific CC number, which is the identifier for the specific button, and a value, which is basically the current physical position of the fader or button. So you can see that if I move a fader up and down, it's always on the same channel, it's always the CC number, but the actual value changes from a range of 0 to 127. We can map these values to functions using the MIDI Learn feature in Ableton. This is by far the easiest way of linking a controller with Ableton. And if you're completely new to MIDI controllers, perhaps this is where you want to start. The only thing you need to do is click on anything that you want to link while in MIDI Learn mode and then hit a certain button. Before you do this, however, you need to make sure that the remote is switched on in the preferences. So what you do is you look up the controller that you want to use in the input list. In my case, it's a Nano Control, and then you make sure the remote switch is turned on. So once you've done that, you can simply go into MIDI Learn, you hit a button and it will assign it, in this case, to a clip. And when we map things in this fashion, we get a list that shows us which CC numbers are linked to which functions inside Ableton. From here we can change the range as well. We could invert these ranges that the fader works the other way around, etc. As with a lot of things that are simplified though, with this method we quickly run into limitations. One of the most obvious limitations is that you can only use one button or encoder to do one specific thing. For example, if I MIDI Learn this one here and then this one, it will say that the selected controller conflicts with the previous mapping, blah, blah, blah. Do you want to replace it? So we can only use one of them at a time. And another prominent limitation would be that there's quite some functions missing. What, for example, if we want to use a MIDI controller to scroll down or to open the browser? We cannot really do that. There are some handy buttons here hiding at the side of Ableton, but that's pretty much it. So once you start working with this method, it's likely that you quickly run into limitations yourself. To give you another example, let's say that you want to assign buttons to launch clips. If you have a bunch of clips like this, you're very quickly gonna run out of buttons, physical buttons that is. So this brings us to MIDI Remote Scripts. MIDI Remote Scripts are scripts that are specifically designed for certain controllers, which makes them vastly more powerful than using the basic MIDI Learn function. Some famous controllers in this category are the Ableton Push or the APC40. Now, I happen to own an APC, and when we select the script for that controller, we can see a lot of fancy things happening. For one thing, we can now see this grid selector. We see this pink line here around the clips. And with this, we can actually use the same buttons to map multiple clips. So using the clip launch buttons on the APC, we can launch anything within this grid. So therefore, these clips don't have to be hard mapped. We can simply scroll down and launch the next set of clips. And in a similar fashion, with a controller like this, we don't have to map any encoders as well. The controller automatically recognizes when we select an audio effect rack, and it will map its controls to those parameters. So if I select this effect rack here, my encoders control these knobs. If I select this one, they will control those knobs. And this is what the famous blue hand indicates. It shows which rack is being controlled, or which one has the attention of the controller. And it can do all of this because Ableton is actually providing the controller with information. This is also why you see feedback of the clip colors. Ableton is actually talking back to the controller. In the first example where we hard mapped something, the controller is incredibly stupid. It doesn't know anything about Ableton. It just sends a value and Ableton handles all the rest, these values. With the MIDI Remote Script, however, there's a Python script in between the controller and Ableton, which translates messages back and forth. And we can select that script for the controller from the preferences, as we've seen. And if we do so, this script will take over the default behavior of the controller. And like I said, this opens up a whole range of possibilities. You can have, for example, a shift function where a button performs a different action when the shift is held down. With this APC, for example, you can hold shift down and then you can scroll down in bigger increments. And all of this kind of stuff is not really possible with regular MIDI mapping. Now, as you can see here, there are lots of scripts that are natively supported by Ableton, but if there isn't a script for the controller that you own, you can always make one yourself. I did this for a variety of different controllers, and it's a really fun process, but it will definitely take a lot of time. You have to know or learn how to write Python code, and you need to familiarize yourself with the Ableton API functions. To give you an example of these scripts, they live right here. We're now in the Ableton application, then contents, app resources, MIDI remote scripts. And this is a list of all the controllers, the same one that you see in Ableton. So you can see here, I made a couple of scripts for my Livid bass controller, and they look like this. And basically what you do in these scripts is you tell the button that you want to use, you specify which button you want to use, and then you say what that button is going to do. Now, if you want to know more about this, I'll post a link in the description of the video, which you can check out for more details. If you don't want to take this route, however, which would be very understandable, there are some other easier ways to turn an unsupported controller into a more powerful one. And the first one of those methods would be user scripts. User scripts are basically text files that are provided by Ableton and allow you to set up more advanced interactions for your MIDI controller. In reality, these text files are communicating with the very same Python files as the actual MIDI remote scripts, but they are much easier to work with as they don't require any Python knowledge. In order to set this up, we need to alter the text file in this location. And you'll find two files in this location, a how-to file and a user configuration.txt file. What you need to do here is you create a new folder, I named mine tutorial test, and copy the user configuration file into that new folder, after which you can edit the file to set it up for your specific controller. So let's try, for example, to set up an encoder to control the selected device rack for us. The first thing we need to do is we need to give the input name for the script. So to do that, we can again use that MIDI monitor application, which will show the sources or will show the name of MIDI devices that are connected to your computer. Or you can go into Ableton and you can look it up right here in the input sections. So for my example, my controller is called Nano Control 2 Slider/knob, which we can see in this list right here. So that's the first thing we write down, and then it's good to carefully read these instructions as well as in the other text file. Then if we scroll down here, we can see that we have some encoder values. So what we need to do after this, we need to figure out which values my controller is sending. And to do that, we can again use our very handy MIDI monitor. We just turn a knob on the controller and we can see that's on channel 9. The first knob has a CC number of 16, and then the value is irrelevant at this case. So what we need to do is we need to say 16 for encoder 1. By default, this will come up like this, everything will show like -1, which means that it's not doing anything. So here you fill out these CC numbers. And then below that, we can set the channel numbers if it's a different channel than 0. Now, this is a confusing thing. We had channel 9, right? But here it says 8. That's because these channels are counted from 0 to 15 rather than 1 to 16. So 8 is actually 9, 9 is actually 10, etc. This is why it helps to read those text files. So once you've done this, you will save the file, and then you actually need to close out of Ableton and then go back into Ableton, because when Ableton launches, this is when it will actually read those text files. So once you've closed out of it and got back into Ableton, we can select the device and we should be able to control it. Now, if this doesn't work, we've probably messed something up. And one thing we forgot is we need to set this script to actually listen to, or we need to set the controller to listen to the script. So here we have the controller, nano control. And then in this list here, we need to find the folder name. And I believe I gave it a name of tutorial something, tutorial test. There it is. So now we activated this script for this controller right here. And we need to set the input. And we also need to make sure that the remote switch is turned on. So let's try this again. There we go, now it works. And as you can see right now, when I click on a different device, it still listens to this second device right here. And that's because if we right click here, it says to lock to control surface 6. If we switch this off, the effect that is visible currently, or the effect that is selected and has the blue hand, will be controlled by this controller. Can try the other ones as well. So this is very nice because we don't need any MIDI mapping. You can see nothing of this is MIDI mapped. It just works through that text file. And if we want to hard map something, we can just say lock to this control surface, and then it doesn't matter wherever I go, it will always control that device rec. Alright, so there are 3 different methods already to use a MIDI controller in Live. Let's do one more. And this one is by far the most advanced method of controlling Ableton, and it's called ClyphX. ClyphX is a set of extension scripts that you can load into your MIDI Remote Script folder. And once you've done that, you can access literally every feature in Ableton through clip or device rec names. Let me show you how this works. So the first step is to download ClyphX, and there's a paid version right here, ClyphX Pro, and there's a free version. The free version is not supported anymore, but it still works, so it might be an easy place to start. And once we were at this page, we can download it right here. As soon as you've done so, you get a folder with a couple of files, including a very well written manual. And I would highly suggest reading this manual, since it might take a while to wrap your head around the immense power of the scripts. But with this folder, the only other thing that you need to do is you need to take this ClyphX folder, which has all the scripts, all the Python scripts in there, which you really don't need to deal with. You need to copy them into your remote script folders, which again on Mac was under app contents, app resources, MIDI remote scripts, and then you just put it in here. So you can see I already have these files in there. So the idea here again is that we have these Python scripts made by Stray, the author of ClyphX, which you can communicate with via simple text commands, just as in the use the script example, but with much more power. And the simplest way to start doing is launching clips in Ableton, which have the command written as a clip name. So I have a couple examples here. The first thing we need to do is we need to make sure again that ClyphX is selected as a control surface. So I can select it right here. If you have the free version, you want to choose ClyphX. If you have the paid version, you can choose ClyphX Pro. And if you do this, you can see this ring around the selected clip or selected cell here. So once we have that, we can be pretty sure that ClyphX is working, but let's test it by writing a command in a clip name. So let's start with an opening and a closing bracket, and then we'll type metro on, which should enable the metronome if we launch the clip. And that works. This is just a very simple example though. There's lots of power hiding inside ClyphX. One very cool thing that we can do is we can write psych in a clip name. You see an example here. And this will trigger each action after each other. So we're using a couple of different actions here. Add MIDI, add audio, and then I believe we set the BPM to 95. So if I hit this one time, it will create a new MIDI track. I'll switch off the metronome. If I hit this again, it will create a new audio track. And if I launch this again, it will set the tempo to 95. And now the cool thing, of course, is that, remember I said that you cannot use a MIDI button, a button on your controller with regular MIDI learn to do multiple things at once or multiple things in a row. Well, with ClyphX we can. We can assign this clip to a button on our MIDI controller, and then let's remove these. Let's return the tempo to 120. It already is. Now if I hit this button once, it should create a new MIDI track, then a new audio track, and then it should change the tempo. There are countless more examples though. Let's take a quick look at the manual to find some of them. One thing we can find in here, for example, is Focus Browser. So let's try that one. We'll create a new clip. We'll start with opening and closing brackets, and we'll say Focus Browser. And it will open the browser for us. So this is a way of really customizing your perhaps cheap MIDI controller into something very advanced, especially since we don't need to do this within clip names. We can do this within a specific text file as well. We can see that text file right here. And the way this works is that we give our command a name. This is an arbitrary name that we can think of. Then we specify the CC number, or we specify the fact that it's a CC message. Then we specify the number, the channel, then we specify the actual CC number, and then we give it an action. So in this case, the action says, all right, on track 6, listen to the device, which is called Keylab Dev 1, and then reset it. And then after that, some MIDI, a specific MIDI string. This is a sysx string that we're setting. So with this, I can press this button on my MIDI controller, and then it will exactly reset the devices that are named like this. So we don't actually have to use these clip names. We can set all of the actions up in a text file, and we can do very, very advanced stuff. So this is a very powerful method of controlling Ableton, and everything is explained in great detail in the ClyphX manual. If you prefer the video format, however, I have a much more in-depth, albeit a little bit outdated video series on ClyphX right here in YouTube, and I will link to this below the video as well. So here we are, 4 different methods to communicate with Ableton via MIDI. We have MIDI Learn, MIDI Remote Scripts, User Remote Scripts, and ClyphX. And like I said, I actually wanted to show you all the different methods to talk with Ableton, including iOS devices and mobile devices and tablets and OSC control, which communicates over a wireless network. It's all very fancy stuff, but I'd have to save that for another video. I do have a full overview of all these things, however, in much more depth in my Ableton Live Performance video course. This is a 3.5-hour course, which really goes in depth on all the different methods of performing with Ableton, as well as how to design your set, how to create transitions between your tracks, etc. I will put a link to that course in the description as well. For now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.